The Surface RT is one of those devices I really wanted to love when it came out. Back then, of course, I didn't really have money for anything as fancy as this, but it's a very strange device nowadays, and even when it came out, its reception was incredibly mixed due to the odd approach Microsoft was taking with Windows 8 at the time. Keep in mind, this is back from 2012, so Windows 8 was still fairly fresh back then. No one liked it just like no one likes it today, and it was just overall a weird device, and it obviously shows because of the approach Microsoft was taking. Hardware wise, though, let's take a look at her. On the right side, we have the microphone, mini HDMI, full size USB 2 port, as well as the Surface Connect port before it was called that. Bottom, we got nothing. There is a keyboard attachment right here, which is attached to the computer, obviously. This side, we got the volume rocker, the headphone jack, and another little speaker. And on the very top, we've got two microphones, the antenna band, as well as the power button. Now, the distinguishing feature of the Surfaces back then was obviously the kickstand. The kickstand was pretty much one of the selling points of the thing. It made the thing unique. This is back when obviously iPads were a little more relevant, as well as just tablets in general. So the kickstand was marketed as something to turn your tablet into a laptop, as well as making it more effective for things like media consumption, games, all that kind of stuff. Now, being an original Surface, this kickstand only has one angle. It's not fully adjustable like every Surface since the Pro 3, and even then the Pro 2 had another angle. Also underneath, we have a micro SD slot right there. Pretty much self-explanatory. Add some more storage because these only came with 32 and 64 gigs built in. Now that we're on specs and all that, may as well go over them with all that storage. So as I said, 32 or 64, take your pick. 2 gigs of RAM in there, and being an ARM CPU, it's an NVIDIA Tegra 3. Now for you tech-minded folks out there, you'll know that that doesn't mean full Windows. You're going to have to run some sort of slimmed-down version, which the Surface RT most definitely does. Now if we just pull open the cover right here, you can see my ugly mug and the reflection, as well as the display. So this is a 1336 by 768 display, 16 by 9. This is far before they started doing the 3 by 2 aspect ratio. You got your Windows button, as well as your webcam, as well as the privacy light next to it. And obviously we have a type cover attached to it. Now this is the second generation of type cover, because that's what I found in the recycle bin when I got this machine. But yeah, it's a chiclet style keyboard, obviously not an island keyboard or anything. Travel is fair. It's pretty much what you expect for something this thin. And this is that one connector that I had mentioned earlier. Now going back to the hardware of the thing, it's built really solid. It feels like a substantial device, and with that comes the, I guess, downside of the thing being somewhat heavy and unwieldy compared to the iPads and similar Android tablets back in the day, but you are getting a full-fledged version of Windows on it to a degree, so I believe that trade-off was kind of one of the marketing things behind it. Pulling open that kickstand, attaching the keyboard cover, and adjusting my camera so you can actually see what the hell I'm doing, we can go ahead and log into the machine with my pretentious icon. So obviously, like I said, this runs Windows RT. This is running RT 8.1 Update 3, I believe. Total pain in the ass to get it onto Update 3 because I'm pretty sure the RT update servers are pretty much toasted by now. In any case, that adds the start menu sort of functionality, but this is still Windows 8. It's not gonna have any of the features that Windows 10 does, other than kind of looking similar with that start menu. Now the whole ARM thing was a pretty interesting, I guess, debacle back in the day. ARM obviously is a different architecture than x86, and with that you can't really run any applications besides ones that were preloaded and ones that were available through the Windows Store, which is now a barren wasteland, even more so than when it was new. So no Google Chrome, no Photoshop, no games, no Steam. You're very limited on this machine, which makes it almost impossible to use nowadays unless you're doing incredibly basic web browsing as well as internet and that kind of stuff. So we'll just go ahead and pop into the settings here, because why not? And you'll see the info there. Like I said, it's that NVIDIA Tegra 3 processor. It's a quad core at 1.3 gigahertz, 2 gigs of RAM, and it is a 32-bit operating system. Not that it really matters with this being an ARM-based OS. So essentially, there's not too much you can do on these things nowadays. There are a couple choice apps available on the Microsoft Store, and they kind of work. They're incredibly slow. This hardware has not aged very well, considering how slow everything is, and I'm sure it doesn't help that a lot of the services, the internet and web services, the market services and all that, are running on lower resources up at Microsoft or just not running at all. I was able to get some apps installed as well as update the machine. The updates were interesting. It got a lot of the security updates fine through Windows Update, but for like the update 3 with the start menu here, I did have to sideload them manually. But I mean, other than that, I guess it's a somewhat usable machine for just really basic sort of tasks. Even then, it takes quite a while. So, weather, how exciting, right? Now for things such as web browsing, I believe I said it earlier, you can get away for like super basic web browsing, but almost anything else is quite difficult for it. Like YouTube, it barely runs videos. It'll stutter, it's quite bad. So let's just pop this open. Obviously, you can see it's not the fastest when it comes to loading web pages, thanks to good old Internet Explorer 11. Like I said, you can't really install any other browsers on it. You'll see that it's pretty much freezing up and stuttering already.
In an extremely handsome package. On my planet, people were always after my powers.
You can't even really watch videos at full speed on this thing. We'll just close that out before I get a copyright strike. If it decides it wants to close. Good old Internet Explorer, right? And there we're back at the desktop. Even just closing an application takes forever, but honestly, that might be more so Internet Explorer's fault. Another thing to note, my download speed and all that is just fine, so it wasn't the Wi-Fi in that case. Now going back to the device itself, like I said, it's running 8.1 on an ARM processor. Obviously, it was never as fully fledged as the proper Windows 8.1, but it's kind of what you got to deal with on a Surface RT. The main reason I wanted to make this video is to take a look at where the Surfaces came from. As you might have noticed, I do have a Surface Book looming in the corner right there, being very disappointed that I'm messing with an RT. But, yeah, it was just a weird start for the Surface line. Obviously, this came out first, then came the Surface Pro 1, which was actually a full-fledged PC. This thing is more of a tablet slash productivity machine, if you consider productivity just Microsoft Office, which all of these came bundled with, which was a nice perk, but nowadays it's pretty much unusable. And I think this shows a lot of interesting quirks in the philosophy of Microsoft back then when Windows 8 was relevant. They wanted to market Windows 8 more so as a do-it-all sort of operating system. So you'd have these low-power tablet, laptop, hybrid sort of things like this machine right here. Obviously, Windows 8 Mobile or Windows Phone 8 was a thing back then, that poor little operating system. And obviously you had the full-fledged version of Windows, and Microsoft seemed to want a sort of continuity between the three of them. Universal apps were supposed to be a thing for this, so basically you'd have an an ARM compiled application for the RT, and that would translate to Windows Phone 8 pretty much without many issues, only requiring a couple little tweaks. Then obviously your full desktop operating system, there would typically be an x86 version compiled for it as well. So I think it's just an interesting footnote in Windows history, these little machines. Are they usable? Uh, I would say absolutely not. It's a pain to use this thing for anything other than the most basic of tasks. I've actually just been considering either using this thing as a coaster or a glorified digital photo frame. There's really not much you can do with these things nowadays. But it's really interesting to me seeing how we came from this thing to this thing. Obviously, this isn't really the same class of device, but it's another Surface device nonetheless. I've owned a Pro 2, this thing obviously, the Surface Book with the dedicated GPU, and a Pro 3 in my years, and it's just interesting seeing the evolution of these devices. Obviously, this is from a much different era than the Surface Book, and even say the Surface Pro 3, it was a very different device back then, and things just have changed interesting. The whole 3:2 aspect ratio, excuse me, for more productivity and note-taking rather than just being a standard-ish tablet, laptop sort of device that more so was a mediocre tablet and a mediocre laptop. They've now transformed more into a separate class of machines, in my opinion. Like, obviously we got the Surface Book, like the one right here, for more professional sorts of applications. The regular Surface Pro is turned into the sort of basic one. Surface Go is more of an iPad competitor, and then there's the Surface Pro X, which was just announced and released. That's kind of back in the same ARM deal with this thing. While it runs full Windows 10, it's a somewhat slimmed down version, I believe, just because you can't really run 64-bit applications on it. In any case, I don't know what else to say, so I'm just going to wrap this up. Should you buy one of these? No. Unless you are a collector of some sort or just interested to see what things were like back then, there's not too much reason to own a Surface RT. Like I said, I've been struggling to find any sort of use for this thing. As of now, it's really just taking up space, and I wanted to make a video on it because I didn't have much else to do. But that's just about it for this thing. There's not too much I can say about it other than it was a cool idea at the time, but with time it became more and more obviously flawed. That ARM architecture just did not age well on this, and obviously support was cut for it, I think, a couple years ago. And alongside that, even when support was there for it, there wasn't much you could do with it unless it was the most basic of things. In any case, thanks for watching and listening to me ramble about Microsoft and all that. And if I ever decide to make more videos, feel free to tune in. Take it easy.